Happy Easter! Welcome to the PodStation by Trophies on PSN. I'm Kryptonite Dragon.
And I'm Dante's Hero.
And welcome to our Easter edition. If you celebrate Easter, happy Easter. Our Easter edition will be about girls, women, girl gamers, girls in games, girls as the protagonists in games. Before we hit that, Dante, what's our game of the week?
Do you know what? I have literally just forgotten what I'd picked out. What's the answer to that? I literally had something in mind for our pick
And
of
then
the
you
week this
started
week,
gaming
and
before we went live.
yeah, I started playing Luminous on the PS Vita, and now I've just suddenly thrown a blank now.
Good
Um,
job. Good job.
I can't for the life. I know it's something I played recently, but it's bugging the crap out of me now.
Why don't you do a recap? What's some of the games you've recommended? Just kind of go through a bunch of the titles. Let's do kind of a recommended game recap.
Yeah, so some of the games that we've looked at over sort of recent weeks are things like Machinarium, and I know you're sort of a big fan of that. If you want to talk
I
about
am.
that a little bit,
I am. I like that. It's a good game.
yeah, it's definitely fun. And the interesting thing with that game is that it came about as a result. It wasn't actually going to come to consoles because originally it was slated for an XBLA title, but basically the developers didn't want to hand over their rights to the game, and so Microsoft said, right, you're not publishing it on XBLA, and as a result, Sony then approached the guys to actually do it on
Cool.
PS3, and that's how we got it.
Now, did you play it all the way through? Did you beat it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a fun.
It leaves hints that there'll be a second one.
Yeah, I
Without
really
giving
do
any
hope they
spoilers.
keep on with that.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to play through it again at some point this year because there's actually a PS Vita version coming. So it's definitely worth the money. And to be honest with you, I didn't actually buy Machinarium. It came free for PlayStation Plus, but it was a fantastic freebie, that one.
Now, what were you playing so intently right before we started?
That was Luminous.
And you'd recommended that before, right?
Yeah, we recommended that for Vita owners. It's like Tetris on acid.
Tetris on acid. Great.
Is the way that people tend to describe that. Um,
Don't do drugs, folks.
yeah, don't. But it's kind of like Tetris, but the idea is you've got to kind of get four colours of the same block together. But unlike Tetris, where it's in like a column, like a thin column, you've
Okay.
got like full screen to fill up, and the background changes, the music changes. It's actually got some pretty eclectic tunes on there that you obviously heard some of it before we came on, but it basically, whenever you pop four blocks, it plays a musical note because you've always got this line running through the game. So every time you play the game, the music you hear will always be slightly different.
Cool.
And that's kind of one of the things that makes that unique in that respect. So if you've got a Vita, I'd definitely recommend picking. Obviously, we have recommended picking that up, but do bear that in mind.
What are some other ones we had? Well, we definitely had The Walking Dead, the episodic version, not the recent version, which of course was a game of the year.
Yeah.
And many other awards that it got.
And as we said last week, it's coming to PS Vita, and obviously the second season's due the end of this year.
Yeah, second season. Yeah.
Which will be cool. And I'm just hoping people are going to buy it after the disaster that is Activision's Walking Dead. I still have not heard about that.
I've heard even more about it. I had some people that I kind of came across talking about it in public, and all they had to say was, "Man, this should have been such a great game." Like that was the repeated theme was, the graphics absolutely sucked. I guess there was some dialogue breakdown that didn't make sense, and it just overall, I guess everyone feels that it was just poorly written and poorly designed, like they didn't put much time into it. So, and unfortunately, it has some really good characters in it. It had Merle and
And and the
everything.
thing is, it shouldn't really surprise anyone because obviously, I'm not being funny, but it's an Activision game. Essentially, it was announced without very much fanfare. It was good sort of 3 or 4 months before we actually saw any footage of it. After it was announced, which it never bodes well for a game because usually, if a new game is coming, especially if it's one based on a popular franchise, they want to show it off as much as possible.
Yeah.
And Activision were a bit hesitant to actually show this off when they first announced it, so it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that it's actually turned out pretty crap.
So is this a get whatever money you can based on the popularity of the show, the other
Yeah,
game,
yeah, but I
and
mean,
just the
it's
franchise?
it doesn't surprise me because that's what Activision does best. You know.
Hmm. And there's even isn't there a Facebook Walking Dead game? I'm pretty sure there is.
I haven't looked into it that far, if I'm honest. To be honest with you, I'm
Well,
still a
people are
little
probably.
behind on the TV show, and I do at some point want to pick up the graphic novels as well because they look
Oh yeah.
great. So
And people are probably pretty confused. And I mean, the other thing too is across the entire entity, it changes greatly. Like the graphic novels are very different than the show, and you know,
yeah,
it's
I
it's
mean
kind of
that's
weird,
kind
but
of why I want to read them because it's like I want to sort of see the differences because without sort of going off on a tangent here, too straying too far from games and stuff, but I watched a recent TV show on Netflix called 13, and I don't know
okay,
if you remember, Ubisoft made a game called 13 that was cel shaded and it was based on graphic novels. I can't remember the authors, but it turns out the graphic novels were actually spot on, and they'd managed to actually capture that in the TV series and nail it,
cool.
as well as they had done in the game. So it just goes to show that graphic novels are probably the best material if you're gonna turn something from a book, a franchise. If you're going to create a franchise, then some of the best source material you can get is from graphic novels. I mean,
Yeah,
you look at some of the similar sort of movies that have been successful, that have been done like graphic novels, such as obviously all the Marvel movies are extremely popular and do extremely well. Obviously there was Sin City and The Spirit, and those two films were filmed very much in the style of Frank Miller's graphic novels. So
hmm,
just goes to show, but that's really good source material to pull it from if you're going to work on a project like that. And it also just shows you how lazy Activision obviously were with actually building
yeah.
the
Well,
game.
maybe they'll get some negative press from that. Maybe people will be a little bit more cautious with purchasing any of their stuff in the future.
Yeah,
But
and the sad thing is though, Activision will probably pump out another one because they have a license for it,
yeah,
and the studio that created the first one will probably get shut down, and that's terrible. It's well known with Activision that if a studio releases a game and Activision's brand on it, they don't care. They'll get the money, but they'll still shut the studio down when the project's complete.
nice.
And
Well, what are some other ones that stand out? Give me like three or four other ones that you'd
we
recommend.
mentioned Datura. If you remember, that was the tech demo kind of game thing, similar to Linger in the Shadows.
Okay.
That was one of the ones we
About
recommended.
about
Obviously,
Nino Cooney.
yeah,
Need
Nino
no
Cooney was a
Coonies.
full retail one we recommended. I still recommend that. I still
Yeah,
can't
you
believe
still
I haven't
talk
seen
about it.
that many people. Yeah, I still love that game. It's just amazing. And I still think, anybody who
RPGs.
even knows of Studio Ghibli's work owes it to themselves to actually go and play that game.
Okay.
Um, just trying to think some of the... We recommended, obviously, Pixel Junk 4am, which
Yep.
is the music creation game with the PlayStation Move.
Okay.
And Retro City Rampage, we obviously mentioned that before, but that's a fantastic game that sort of takes the mick out of the old 80s arcade games and stuff. Obviously last week we did Capcom Arcade Cabinet, so I won't say too much about that because obviously we covered the majority of that last week. And Papa and Yo, still I barely see anyone play that game. And
Yeah.
it is a fantastic game if you remember.
Some of these are so far off the radar, that's the thing. You're experiencing quite a variety of games. You try a lot of these things, and I don't know that many people try a lot of these just kind of off the cuff, because I think the impression is too some of them have a almost like a child appearance, like they're aimed at a younger audience. You know what
Yeah,
I'm saying? And
yeah, but
those are often the ones that can be very creative and the most fun.
and the thing is, I mean, just looking back at them, I mean, thinking of some of the recommendations we've made, they are in such a, I guess, niche would be the word for it, but they bring so many new ideas to the table. It's unreal. I mean, as I said with the Pixel Junk 4am game, being able to live stream music that you're creating on the fly across PlayStation Network is something that no other game has done to this day. The Datura demo was just, I say demo, it's not, but that was fantastic. The Unfinished Swan made a compelling case for games to be considered as art.
Yeah.
Retro City Rampage reminded us of everything that was fun about the arcade games that we, the SNES games and stuff that we used to play in the late 80s, early 90s. So,
Yeah.
and it's just bizarre how much,
And there's
ground all these titles cover.
there's some Easter sales going on, so everyone take a look, see what you can get. Maybe the other thing to remember, some of these older PSN games are going for pretty cheap now. You
Yeah,
save a buck. You
there
can
are.
often get, now you can get 4 or 5 games for what you'd pay for a full retail. So,
Oh yeah, absolutely. There was one that Warbear reminded me of, and I picked it up when it came out on disc. But at the moment, and I mean this is an absolute bargain. There's a game called Child of Eden, and it's kind of like a shooting light show music game. And if you've ever
what, you don't
played
have a
like,
you don't have a genre name for that one? Is it
not
something you made
really.
up?
But if you remember the Sega game Res on PS2, then you'll be familiar with the concept
No, I
of
don't.
Child of Eden. But it's such a beautifully crafted game. I can't really explain it other than it is truly an experience. It's not so much a game as it is experiencing the emotion through the music, but also the light show that's in front of you. And again, it's another one of those games where every time you play it, you'll always get something slightly different. There is a story to the actual game itself, but I digress anyway. The point I was trying to make is it's at the moment it's £3.59 on the PlayStation Store if you have PlayStation Plus. And just to put that in perspective, that's like $5 for a full retail PS3 game. Comes with a platinum trophy as well for those that are brave enough to take it on. But it is a fantastic game. So much so that it got huge ratings on Metacritic, and I'm surprised that it's even that low at price. And I really, when it came out, I often thought to myself, I really wish more people were playing this game because it's that good.
So lots of bargains to be found, lots of good stuff.
Yep.
Take a look around. See what you can
Should I
find.
mention about the Easter egg sale that's going on the
Sure, go
Europe
for
store?
it. Yeah.
Okay, in Europe at the moment we've got a specific section on the store where it's like, on the new storefront you can scroll across multiple screens.
Yes.
Well, on the EU store now we have one that's called the Easter egg hunt, and you scroll along and you find like beavers and raccoons and stuff hidden in trees and things like that, and Easter eggs, and you click on the Easter eggs and you've got to try and find the deal that's currently going on. These deals actually only last for 48 hours. And they're doing this all over Easter. So far, to date, we've had Killzone HD Infamous Festival Blood Bundle for £6. Tomb Raider, the new Tomb Raider game, was at £20, which is about half the price it costs to buy it new for the digital version. And at the moment, just the new one today is PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, which obviously if you buy it digitally, you get the PS3 version and the PS Vita version for £15.99. It's about $27. Yeah, so, and these will be changing every 48 hours over the Easter week, so I think it'll probably be to around about the 12th or 15th of April, something like that, that they'll start to finish. So do go and keep your eyes peeled on both the PlayStation Twitter feed, because they do actually tweet them out as well, which seems a bit pointless if you're going to make it an Easter egg hunt. But yeah, do keep your eyes out on the PlayStation Europe Twitter feed, because they do post the deals on there. Do have some fun with it. It's kind of nice to see them doing something fun with the new store as well. I kind of like that. You know, they tell you you've got deals and you've got to go find them without too much effort.
Yeah.
It's kind of a cool thing to do.
Hmm.
And I've just remembered what our PSN pick of the week was going to be. Thinking about it.
Well, maybe you better save it.
Yeah, I'll save that for next week. So, topic this week.
Topic this week
is a meaty one.
Okay.
So I'll give people a bit of a backstory of this and why we should sort of be looking at this and discussing it. I read an article. I won't say the website, because unfortunately a lot of their articles are, quite frankly, honestly crap. But this one was actually quite interesting and good, which surprised me. But it was an interview with the developers of the upcoming game, Capcom's Remember Me, which is based in Neo Paris in the future and has a female lead character. And one of the interesting things that emerged over the course of this interview is that the developers behind the game had actually had problems pitching the title, to the point of where 6 or 7 major publishers had actually turned them down. And part of the reason was this, in the alpha build they'd made of the game, they wanted to explore the female characters. I can't remember what her name is, but they wanted to explore some of her personal life. And so they put this thing in where she sort of has this thing with a guy and she kisses him. They didn't go into too much specific detail with this. And one of the things that developers were quite annoyed about was the feedback they got. And they said, well, we're not going to take this game on because it would confuse the player. And the developers were like, what do you mean it will confuse the developer? And they said, we have no problem with it being a female protagonist, but if you're a bloke playing as a female character and you kiss a bloke, you'll get confused. So I'm sort of sat here thinking, you know what? I wouldn't actually find myself getting confused with this. And as a result of this article continued on, and it had some interesting facts to back it up in terms of female lead characters. We don't see a lot of female lead characters in games because statistically they don't sell, which is bizarre if you think about it, because how many millions of copies of games have sold all year? And, you know, I would probably guesstimate that at least 85% of them, probably more, are all featuring male lead characters, and the women are always off to the side as a sidekick or a secondary character, like obviously in Bioshock Infinite. But none of them are pushed to the forefront, especially when it comes to new IPs. I mean, okay, Tomb Raider's a given.
Yep.
We expect that to sell well. And, you know, Crystal Dynamics did a great job with showing how you could explore some of the female psyche, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
With the vulnerabilities and the being exposed and things like that. And all this made me question, why is it that these games don't sell well? Are we really going to get confused as male players? And, what is wrong with having more female protagonists as a lead character?
I don't know. There's a lot to this. I mean, what comes to mind too for me is a lot of games have customization. You can not only can you play a male, but you can pick from a variety of different characters that are male. You can
Well,
pick
it's
their skill
interesting.
sets, you can pick their outfits, you can pick their guns and all these things, and they have that selection. But they don't allow you to play as a female, and particularly the combat games.
Yeah.
There's still probably some
Well, it's interesting you brought
left
that
leave
up
over from
because
military because you can't have females in direct combat, and they're starting to proliferate some of the they're on submarines and stuff in the United States and everything now, and I mean, you go back just even 10 years, that was unheard of.
yeah,
So,
I'm kind of glad you brought up the customization thing because obviously, there is obviously one game that's been at the forefront with challenging a lot of taboos in the
yeah,
industry games,
even
which is obviously
homosexuality
EA
and
and
everything. Yeah,
which is obviously EA and Mass Effect,
right.
and as a result of this article that I read, even with the ability to have female shepherd, if you're a bloke, you know where I'm coming from with this. The typical bloke is obviously going to create a woman character to be able to do the whole woman on woman thing or woman on alien thing. You know what I mean? I don't know what it is with blokes. They just, people will probably be listening to the shaking head going, no, I've never thought of that. You're a liar. Everybody, every male's thought about that. But here's the thing. The amount of female shepherds that were created, and EA were able to track this, it was only about 20% of everybody that bought the game.
Wow.
And that still shows that even with the ability to do that and, exploring the male psyche a little bit, well, the stereotypical male psyche, that people still weren't warming to female characters.
Hmm.
Because the vast majority were still playing as male characters. I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you
I
think
don't know.
that's
Maybe
weird? And
maybe there's something to that, and I'd wonder what the stats would be too in terms of like females and if they have a challenge with playing a male character kissing a female, particularly in just the modern day age. I think that there's more acceptance of female on female, and that's really more. I don't know. It's a cultural thing. It's got a lot of implications with the military. The way people are treated. I think homosexuality. I would say that there's a large majority of men too that are okay with a woman being gay, but they're not okay with a man being gay. They have a double standard.
yeah,
And like for me, I played a female character in Mass Effect, and my whole thing is like there's a lot of times where I found it funny because the female character in Mass Effect 2 was actually kind of bitchy. Like her voiceover and everything like that was
yeah,
no, I'm serious. I found her I find it almost like it was a little bit of hilarity that was added to it because
yeah.
it was like she was overly emotional and overacting, whereas the male shepherd was just very like monotone. And so I played that. And then the other thing is there's a lot of views where you're looking at the rear end. I'm like, well, I don't want to look at a male rear end with some of these views. I'd rather have a female rear end in front of my view. So
Yeah.
and
But
then of course
that's why I think it's strange. I really do because as I say, Tomb Raider has always been a great success and a champion of the cause, so to speak. But
mhm.
as you mentioned, I'm sure that if more female characters were put into lead roles, that they were quite happy. I don't think gamers would mind with that, even if there's issues with the sexuality and kissing blokes or whatever. I mean, I like to think that my views are pretty open. That if I was playing a bisexual character, for example, and they kiss both men and women over the course of the game, I would have absolutely no problem with that.
Mhm.
So the question, I guess, is why do you think it is that developers... Do you think developers aren't brave enough to put it in, or...
I don't know. I mean, if it's still not kind of the norm, then I think some of these games push past the norm because when they do that, it becomes a mainstream. It becomes like a mainstream topic that people talk about, and it attracts people to try it and to try it differently, or to know that, oh, you've got all these options. That they're open to let us build our character how we want and all that other stuff. So it's kind of like they're putting a positive effect into it. And the other thing that I'll point out that I think is also another factor is think about the multiplayer. And from what I know from talking to female gamers, they also don't always like to turn their mics on. They don't always like to be recognized as a female gamer, because then when it goes to the multiplayer element, then guess what? Then it's like, oh, it's a girl. Or worse yet, you're familiar with PlayStation Home.
Yeah.
How many do you think? How many women on there running around in the sexy outfits and all that are actually guys?
Yeah.
You know,
Sadly.
sadly.
Sadly,
And
there are.
or if they are a girl, how do they get treated? They pop up on there, and then like from all four corners of the plaza comes all these freaking hey, what are you doing? You want a private chat? Blah blah blah, and dancing and grinding up against them and everything like that. And you're just like, oh my gosh,
I wonder
seriously.
then if part of the problem is with situations like that, is part of the problem is the anonymous act, the anonymous behaviour behind sitting behind an ID, so that people can't tell the difference if you're male or female.
Right.
And as a result, obviously, it leads to part of problems because, looking at the PS4 for just a second, one of the interesting things that we saw about this week is that obviously you could, put your real name there, link it to your social networks. And I know some people, are still apprehensive about the whole social media thing. But I then wondered, would it cut out a lot of the crap if you were able to identify the people by their real name and real sex? And because essentially what you can then do is it makes it easier to determine how immature they are. If I'm looking at I've got someone on my PSN list, for example, just as an example, who's 16, male or whatever, I know that person's going to be more often than not immature.
Mm-hmm.
When speaking to people online. I've done it myself at that age, and so do you think some of those, I wonder if that will cut out some of this crap that goes on with things like that?
Well,
Because
and I wonder about the other end of how much of the functionality and everything, just like in my post in that topic about, how much of the functionality am I going to get? Do I have to accept the whole package? Because then you're talking about giving up some of your privacy. And why that's important is, consider if you were now put yourself back in Mass Effect, and now there's multiplayer where you take that character from the single player to the online, and there's some kind of reveal of you're a female playing a character, and you go online and you have a female girlfriend, and then it's there's this stigma. Is it realistic? Am I now putting myself out there that my sexuality, any of that stuff is also kind of connected with the Facebook, and and more importantly to me is, if there's features that you can pull extra friends down, say from Facebook, that I went to high school with, I don't know they play on the PlayStation, and I want their PSN ID to be added as a friend on PSN. Do I have to then reveal my true name and age and location and everything like that to everyone else in the world? Because it's just like on here you're Dante Zero, and on here I'm Kryptonite Dragon, and that's what I want to be known as. I don't come on here and say my name's Brian so and so, and it's a personal choice. And if you take that away,
my
or make
concern,
it dependent upon some of the functionality and some of the decisions, then that's not anybody's business to reveal but me.
Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from, but my concern is that the fact is that if we hide behind, huge levels of um, anonymity, is kind of like you end up pushing women to a certain degree to be who end up becoming the niche or the minority of gamers, and I think that's kind of sad for the industry. It's all right us saying, we'd like developers to be a little bit braver and push women to the forefront of their games, but at the same time, as gamers, we also have to accept that we have to be more welcoming and less immature about stuff, and just not go, oh look, there's a gamer with boobs, you know what I mean, and get silly with it. It's just, and the thing is, how do you tackle that?
Hmm.
And the only way I can kind of see what, in some respects Sony are doing with the whole real name thing, and it's worth pointing out while we're talking about this a little bit that you can actually choose who on your PSN list that you show your real name to, and how public you want to go. There's levels so all of it is completely customizable. You can, if you wanted to, for example, you can show your PSN, your real name to specific people on your PSN list, but not all your PSN list.
Well, that's good. It's about time
So,
Sony learned to, where I don't
but
have to back out and change a setting and do all.
yeah.
So,
So, coming back to this female protagonist thing, obviously we know, as I said before, that Lara Croft is, has been essentially a sex symbol for the game industry for, 15 years now, something like that, probably
hmm
longer. Um, and I'm curious why we don't have more of that. I really am, because,
and
you know,
and something could be said too about the fact that there's movies that are tied in, and you have an actress that gets the name more out there. Like a lot of people that are not into games would recognize the name Lara Croft. So and associate that with a strong
here's the
female
thing where
character.
I'm curious about, like, with the movie industry, for example. There's no concerns about casting a woman in a lead role. And some of Hollywood's biggest female actors can command $15 to $20 million a movie. People like Jennifer Aniston, Angelina Jolie, and so on. Obviously, I know there's more, but just use those as top of the head examples. And yet people will still pay to go there see their movies, and moviegoers won't have any confusion if, say, for example, Angelina Jolie as the lead role kisses a bloke. Blokes aren't going to be sat there cringing while watching the movie going, no, she kissed a dude, ew. Do you know what I mean? And what's fascinating about that is that the games industry, in some respects, let's sort of just picture the future here, like 20, 30 years down the line. The games industry is probably going to eradicate the movie industry at some point,
hmm
where, essentially you won't watch
Well,
movies anymore. You'll
there's a striking difference too in that in the video game you're trying to involve the person in the story. They're
Yeah,
picking their own direction, and it's more of a first person perspective. So if you're Laura Croft and you're kissing a guy and it's a first person perspective and you put yourself in that character and you forgot that she's female and now all of a sudden you're kissing a guy, there's an element of that as well. But
yeah, but
then you
is
also
that,
got to,
would you not think that's overthinking it a little bit too much?
well, it
Because
is and it isn't. I mean, that's why it's
essentially
different than a
that's
movie.
entertainment. Games is still essentially entertainment. They do tell a story. They are more interactive and more emotive. But they can. At the end of the day, you still play them for fun,
hmm
and you still get involved with the characters for fun. And if somebody, I wouldn't. I genuinely wouldn't believe someone who, say for the example we're using here, I genuinely wouldn't believe if a female, if you were playing as a female lead character and you kissed a bloke and you were a male playing the game, I don't think the thought of questioning your sexuality would ever come up.
No, and I don't think that they are necessarily implying that a person's gonna, suddenly turn gay or question their sexuality from it. But I do think that, it's a little bit of that kind of that quiet homophobia that could be kind of peeking out. because a person can't be a full blown hater and stuff like that all the time. There's various levels of that. A person could be like, you know, they're okay to do what they want to do, but I certainly don't want to see two guys kissing. I mean, just
Would
take
that
that for
really?
what it's a
Let,
comfort level. If you're taking somebody and they're immersed in the situation, and all of a sudden you're kissing a guy and you're just kind of like snapped out of it to like, ew.
yeah,
Um,
but I mean, would you, speaking from your personal perspective, would you have a problem if that was the case? If you had to do that in a game?
no, because it's a game to me. But I would see if somebody was really immersed. That's like take your favorite movie, and okay, let's do Titanic, big budget, box office hit. Let's say now Titanic involved the story of two guys
Hmm.
falling in love, and kissing at the bow of the ship, and now are we on to, well, yeah, that would still be a great movie, and everyone is, as many people would see it, and there wouldn't be any controversy, and it would just be as it is right now with Titanic, or would
I
that or
imagine.
would
I
that change
imagine
it
there
to
would.
people? Some people would be like, that kind of takes away from it for me. That kind of snaps out of it.
I imagine there'd probably be some controversy because obviously at some point the religion question would come up, especially when it comes to, homosexual behaviour.
Well,
But other than
exactly, and
that,
and
I can't believe that people wouldn't go and see something like that because I mean, okay, take a movie like Brokeback Mountain for
see, and
example.
I heard that's a great movie, but I didn't go and see it. It held no interest to me.
Yeah, it's still got great reviews. Millions of people still went and saw it, enjoyed it, and so on. So, why? But I just don't get why if people can be growing up like that and go, what? If people can respect from a grown-up's perspective going and watching a film like that, then why can't they respect games from a grown-up perspective? We've often talked about like David Cage being a visionary, and we say about him, telling other developers and publishers, essentially if you want to make adult games, then you actually need to grow up and make games for adults, instead of just like what you think what you think adults might like, challenge them because adults do like to have a challenge in their entertainment in some respect that challenges maybe some of the views and beliefs they have.
Yeah. You know what I was just thinking about? How about Resident Evil? Isn't that interesting how there's a female lead in the movies, yet she doesn't appear
Yeah.
in the
In the
games?
game at all, and it is fascinating with that. Obviously, in fairness to the games, I mean, the first Resident Evil movie didn't come out till just after Resident Evil 4, I think it was,
Mm-hmm.
and then obviously Resident Evil 5 came out, and with the rest of the movies, and obviously there was a black African American woman in it. I can't remember. Was it Shiva in Resident Evil 5?
Yeah.
And then they've got Ava and other characters, but again, they're not thrust to the forefront of it.
Right. There's sub
And
characters
that's
that.
bizarre. But actually, when you look back through the Resident Evil series, there is a female lead character in there. I think it's is it Nemesis, where it's Claire Redfield, and she even got her own game, Code Veronica X. So there are some female
I was
lead
trying to think of the
characters.
actress. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, there's clearly some room for some change there because I've always wondered about that. It seems like it wouldn't be that hard to put female characters in, but you wonder where that would lead for an actual female to be playing a female soldier, for example, in Call of Duty, and then you'd have everybody going, "Oh, great," or
Well, it'll
"Haha,
be
it's a girl I'm
interesting.
playing with."
It'll be interesting to see how that develops actually, because interestingly enough, one of the new Battlefield 4 trailers showed off a female soldier.
Mm-hmm.
And you get the sort of subtle hint that you may actually be able to play as that character within the Battlefield game.
So do you
it'll be
think?
interesting to
Let me
see
ask
how
you.
they do
Let me
that.
ask you this: do you think it's the job of some of these video game developers to break that barrier first, or
I,
to let that barrier be broken
I
socially?
think it. I think, it is the job of developers in some respect because, the developers put out a product to millions of people. And in order for it to be broken down socially, you have to get people talking about it. And if your products get people talking, which, they quite often do, I mean, otherwise, if they didn't, we wouldn't be here every Sunday. But I think the developers do need to sort of really focus on pushing some of the boundaries. There are some developers out there that are pushing some boundaries. Kojima-san's talked about the fact that Metal Gear Solid 5 may even get banned in some countries because of some of the things that they plan to address within that game.
Yeah, they're pushing boundaries in different ways, though. I mean, there's so many boundaries to push nowadays with the political correctness. But you see it more often than not. It's a the profanity, the gore,
Yeah.
the inclusion of groups that are real, portraying them as the evil bad guys, and
Yeah. See, being politically correct annoys the hell out of me because I'd rather them just challenge certain things. But, I think, there are some taboos and things that need challenging. But, if anything, in the modern day world, in the world we live in now, equality, issues, gender-based equality issues are in the minority for most developed countries. And yet we still play entertainment, video games where gender equality is pretty much non-existent. I mean, I just thinking about this actually, when you were talking before, and I was just trying to think of all the games I can think of with female lead characters, and I could probably count them on two hands. And that for me is pretty sad and depressing.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think, I mean, let's say that you say, okay, these game companies need to start addressing this. Does that mean they have to go 180 degrees the other direction? Picture Tomb Raider, and now it's this whole idea of like, let's have all this ultimate customization, and let's make it so you can play as Larry Croft. I mean, where do you say you're pushing boundaries, or just include it versus going full bore, changing really the
Yeah, but
direction
see,
of your programming and your tasks
I guess it
to be
depends.
inclusive?
I guess it depends on the game that you're making, really, in the first place, and the scripting that's written. I mean, Tomb Raider is probably a bad example because
Yeah.
obviously there are no customization things, and it essentially is an action game, and not
So
too
you think
many action
if
games have the customization thing.
so if they
Um,
include customization, do you think that's the key to, like, if I can play as several different male characters, boom, you should include it as a male character as well?
well, to be honest with you, if Tomb Raider, if say for example, another Tomb Raider game was a very RPG type based game where customization fitted in with the actual the gameplay itself, then having a male character wouldn't bother me.
Hmm.
Being able to things. But I mean, I get that it would change some of the Tomb Raider dynamic, but as I say, it really does depend on the kind of game that you're trying to build, and and this is what I want to say. I wouldn't so much focus on the customization. I would argue that, say, for example, sports games do need to focus on the customization to allow people to have a female football player and female leagues, because they are very real, they do exist, and yet you buy the latest FIFA and you can't customise a woman player or play in the women's
I don't know.
professional leagues,
That's
and
a
the same
tall
with
order.
the NH and the NHL. But it's within the EA's power, and certainly other sports
Yeah,
games
but
developers
you
power to
also,
do that.
like, what percentage of females what's the
I
percentage of females to males playing video games?
Well, video
What's
games are not. I know a lot of women who are sports fans
right? Well,
and
and we're
who
focusing
have
on one
a
thing again. If you broaden that to customization, well, why would I want to play, like, a real young character? Maybe I want to have my character older and more mature or something like that. So maybe now I got to include customization so that someone older playing video games doesn't feel left out, or
But
you know.
again, it depends on the game that you're building. If you got a game heavy with customization, the focus isn't then on what sex the character is, it's what character you want to build.
Hmm.
And that's why I'm saying, sports games in some respect need to address that more so than they have done, because they don't even include that option, and I think that's pretty poor. Whereas most RPGs, for example, that have customization tools will allow you to be either male or female,
Well,
and
like let's.
that's fair enough. But I guess what I'm saying is that if you're creating a single player game, for example, and you forget the customization for a second, I think developers do need to be braver by pushing women to the forefront of some of those games. Some of the best games that I have played have featured female characters as a leading role, not as a sidekick or back thing. I mean, when we talked about historical classics, for example, back in, when was it now? November, December, something like that. One of my favourite games at the time, I mentioned was about Fear Effect, and Fear Effect 2, and those were PS1 games where, they had lead female characters, and, there was some question marks over the sexuality of those characters, but it made for a dynamic story, and I really enjoyed it, and it wasn't just because there was an overlying sexual issue there, but it was just well done. And such, like the Tomb Raider game is fantastic, and it's well done with a female character. The new Capcom game, Remember Me, looks fantastic. It really does look like a breathtaking, real, interesting, dynamic game, and it's a female lead. Beyond Two Souls, which the girl from Elaine Page. That's it. Is that
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Ellen
That role
Page.
was, that role was written for her, and she is the lead female character.
Hmm.
And that again looks like it's going to be great, but what's going to annoy me is it's probably not going to sell as well, and that has to change really. And I think it's because it's not common, if you know what I mean. It's not a common thing to see women at the forefront of lead characters in games, and I think that's part of the problem. If someone comes to you with this idea and says, I have this idea for this amazing game, here's the story, why can they not
Well, let me ask you
create
this.
stories with women characters
Let me
that are
ask you this. You've decided on a game. You said yes, we're gonna make this game. And now I'm a person. I've got all the stats. We've done games before. We've seen the success. And I come and I tell you we're gonna sell about 20% less of these games if we put a female character. Whereas if we just change it and make a male character, same story, same programming, everything else, but we're gonna have a male lead. We'll sell about 20% more copies. What say you?
as a developer, I wouldn't give a stuff. I
You'd
wouldn't
have to.
care.
You'd have to because it would come down to money and
No, and I think we need to put that in context a little bit, because I mean, in this day and age, there are games that have 30, 40 million pounds spent on them in development that feature male characters and so on, and they do appallingly bad. And if there's one thing that this generation has taught me, it is that no matter how expensive a game costs to make, or how many people worked on it, and how much time is put into it, if it is a quality game, it will sell, regardless of all the other factors. If it's a great game, it will sell.
well, I don't know. I think there's some duty there too to kind of pay attention to the mainstream. And if mainstream says, females aren't into the forefront of combat, or you're making a Madden NFL game and there's no females playing in the NFL, what do you?
I'm sure there's female leagues though that they can implement and things.
Yeah, but I guess I'm saying that it's the societal impression of what's the norm versus you doing something that's so outside of that it draws negative attention and turns people off because it appears that you're doing it just to do it.
But They should though. That's what I'm saying to you, because the more they
Who's
do
who's
it,
who's got the duty and responsibility to make push females to the forefront and be the first pioneers to do that if it's not, is financially feasible, or if you're putting a lot of customization and extra options in there,
yeah,
then
but okay, here's my thing though. The games industry itself is a risk. It doesn't matter, as I said before, it doesn't matter how much you spend on a game. There's no guarantee
but you're
on
increasing that
its
risk, is what I'm
success.
saying.
Well, yeah, but I mean, is it any different than the risk that, say, associated with releasing a brand new IP? And look how, and we'll pick this example out. Look how well Sony have done by investing in brand new original IPs. Now,
Hmm.
not all of them have been successful, and there were huge risks behind some of the projects, but they still essentially the quality shine through, and they did reap the rewards by putting out lots of them, and they still are.
Hmm.
And and that's my thing. This is what I'm trying to say to you, is that if we if developers and publishers sit on this mentality of, well, it will sell 20% less, so let's not do it, right? That is the wrong approach to take, because then what you're saying is that um, it's not about the game's development, it's not about putting out a quality product for people to play, it's about making as much money as we can, cutting our losses and run,
Well,
and
I hate to
that's the
break it to
wrong.
you, but that's
Yeah,
the way
but
the real
that's
world works.
well, it is and it isn't for the games industry, and it is a dangerous approach to
Well,
take.
by what you're saying, there would be nothing different than, like, say, Call of Duty comes out, the next one, and it's going to be all female soldiers. You can't play a male soldier. Now tell me, I mean, that's going 100% the other direction to make sure that females get to the forefront. You can play nothing but a female soldier in the next Call of Duty. And what do you think happens?
I,
Controversy,
no,
less
I
people
think
buying the
I
game,
think
they don't make as much money, they spend
uh,
more time and effort directed towards implementing such things
yeah, but we're
because it's
working on
it's a
the
it's a big
we're
change from what they've been doing in the past, so they've got to learn
yeah,
kind
but
of a
we're
new way
working
to.
on the assumption based on current methods, and in some respects, um, the controversy aspect of it would be fine, because if you flip that over and look at it from another perspective, is if it's controversial, it will get people talking about it. And this is the point I'm trying to make about putting more of these out. If it then gets people talking about it, it then starts to crush those social and cultural barriers, because people are talking about it.
Hmm.
And it then doesn't even matter how much that game sells, because that game's going to be well known. Some of the best loved franchises started off not selling barely anything, but something got people talking about them, and you look at where they are now, and you think, if they hadn't done something slightly different, or they hadn't had that impact, getting people to talk about their game, do you think they'd be in the same position that they are now? Probably not.
I don't know.
I mean, it is perfectly plausible, and it is worth pointing out here. We're not. If you were to take the decision to take the risk of making a game that's a new IP, where the main characters are female, there's controversial things covered within the game. What we're talking about is essentially a 20 to 30 million pound project on average, as a risk. Now, if that game sells 1 million copies, which even the worst games tend to do, you still made that money back in some respect. Um, what we're not talking about is, say, making the same mistakes that THQ made, which is, we think everybody would love more plastic in their homes, so we're going to invest £100 million, $100 million in what we believe we can sell for way more than it's worth, and then bankrupt the company.
Hmm.
Because I mean, whether it's a male or female character, and this is the point I really want to sort of ram home, is whether it's a male or a female character, any new IP is risky.
What about
And you
let me
could
let me ask
they'll
you this: what about the impression of games being also kind of being involving kids? What I mean by that is this is all fine and great, but if your impression is that the average gamer is a young kid, then you're talking about some pretty heavy social things to heap upon them or to put into their realm. We're older gamers, but I still think that the majority of you see this time and time again when there's controversy, and you get all these in the United States, you get senators, congressmen, whatever, that come forward and they're against this, and there's too much drugs and violence and sex and video games, and even those as issues cannot be properly addressed because there's you end up
Yeah,
with
but I
bans and
think that I
censorship
think
and
for me that though is more a case of the people that are often complaining are usually the most uneducated ones in relation to it, like, that have never picked up a video game in their life or whatever. And in some respects they do have some valid points. Especially with guns, violence, and drugs and stuff. Um, I'm just playing devil's advocate here for just a second, but
too many guns and
if
video games.
well, because there isn't a realism to it, quite often it's gratuitous violence, where you can shoot 50 odd people and not know the consequences. Because we've had this discussion before, where you shoot 50 odd people and don't even care about the consequences. You just think that's really cool. That's I can kind of see where they're coming from, because it then desensitizes people a little bit, and you're kind of like, well, back in the day, people used to see images like that on telly and would cringe and think, oh, that's horrible, or you'd have a warning or something. And now it's like it's the norm. It's like seeing violence on your TV is the norm. I don't think that's something exclusive to video games, but I do see where they have a point in terms of, with movies, you kind of, if it becomes a bit too much for you, you can just stop it. With games, it's kind of like you're involved in it, and you sort of, if people are like me, is you go onto autopilot mode sometimes when you're playing games that you don't even really think about. You just think, oh, that's cool, as you're blasting tons of people in the face without any consequences. And I can kind of see some of the points they make, but then that kind of emphasises the point that the games should really be made of adults, and deal with adult themes. If you're going to shoot 50 guys in the face during a war, what are the consequences? What are the results of doing that? And they need to start thinking about putting themes like, as we discussed about the themes thing, they need to start thinking about putting more things like that in there. If you're going to go needlessly murder thousands of people on online multiplayer, maybe, perhaps, I don't know, just off the top of my head, punish them. You've murdered 10,000 people online, you get demoted or something, just to get people thinking about the consequences of their actions. Because I don't think people think about that when they sit and play.
See, I don't know. I mean,
it's
I don't know. I think you play video games to get away from that kind of stuff, and when you pull it in too much, and you go extreme on purpose, it's just like if you had a very realistic game that was very gory, that would turn me off in the sense that it's like, what's the point of doing that? And then it breaks with that fantasy element. It's just like you're saying with the violence. You're kind of used to it, but it's also kind of cartoony. You can sit there and say, well, yeah, you've killed 10,000 people, but you also know 10,000 people have respawned, and they're continued to play, and maybe they killed you right after that.
Yeah.
So, there's some element there of, like, that, and this leads back to what I was saying, kind of that shock effect where you're putting something in there to put it in there. You're killing all these people, and it's, business as usual, and then it's like, oh my God, I kissed a guy. And it's like, what was that in there for? If you forced it, you pushed it in there, and that shows. It's like forcing female characters into everything would be almost too drastic the other way, where it would be kind of like, what was the point of that?
okay, you might have misunderstood me there. I'm not saying we should force female characters into games. I'm just saying we should have more of them where it's a first thought as opposed to an afterthought. If you see what I mean.
Yeah,
You
but
know,
but
and this
but
is
I
the
mean,
point
you're
I was
ignoring
making.
like
Let's.
monetary reasons to you know, if I'm a game developer and somebody comes and tells me that the culture just doesn't support it,
Yeah.
then
Well, okay. Let me just explain the point a little bit more that I was making. For example, I thinking about, I want to pitch to a games publisher or whatever. I'm thinking about, a game set in space where you travel between planets and, the something's gone wrong further down your line and you've got to investigate, like, I don't know, sort of, I guess, a point and click or Sherlock Holmes type crime thriller adventure thing in space, but you're trying to find your boyfriend, for example. Um, what would be the problem with that? Because at the end of the day, there's some dynamic. It kind of like it would give the female lead character some reason to go looking um, for the partner, other than just to shrug it off, shoot 50 guys in the head, and be done with it. You know, and I guess what I'm saying is, again,
okay, but you're
certainly in the
wait.
case, like, okay, take Beyond Two Souls, for example.
Wait,
Any
before you move on, let me address that the other end. Okay, if I may. So you've presented your game, and now I'm sitting across the table from you. I'm going to decide if that game, is going to be created or not. Okay? And I say, well, most of our gamers, 85% of the people that play our games are guys. So how about we have a guy looking for his girlfriend? What say you? Now do you say, well, no, that's not what I envisioned because I really want it to be a girl. I want it to be maybe a touch controversial in that way that we have a female
I,
lead.
I don't want to be pedantic, but also I would show off like an early build of the game, and it's to kind of emphasise the point, which is pretty much what Capcom did, which is what the guys with Remember Me did. They built the pre-alpha code and so on, and they showed that off, and you know, and that's where they got essentially the stupid responses of, well, won't the male gamer be confused if he's playing a female character that kisses a dude? And I'm like,
Maybe this is why women don't like action movies as much because from their perspective we're always forcing a male lead action hero
yeah.
upon them.
I mean, as I say, somewhere along the a line, it's got to be a case of where, the 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 gender of your main character has to be a first thought as opposed to essentially all the other nitty uh, the tidbits of stuff building a game, because there'll be people that go, oh, I want to make an open world game, and wouldn't it be really cool if we did this and we threw that into the game, and then and we have this we have a rough idea of the story, but wouldn't it be great if we could let the player affect the outcomes and blah, and then a majority of those type of games, the male character, they sort of go to the male character because it's the default gender for those kind of games. And I'm just kind of curious as, well, what if, they started out with the main character design first and said, and based the story around the gender of the character in some way, because it helps them pose questions out throughout the course of the game. And, this is the point I want to make with, the game like Beyond Two Souls. I mean, David Cage specifically wrote that game for Ellen Page, and if she'd refused, he'd already said, I don't know what we would have done for a game. And so, because he wrote that specifically for a female actor, he was able to then, all the technical building, the footage and the gameplay and stuff was second to getting the story right for the character, and how they were going to accomplish getting the emotion and what questions they were going to ask. And obviously, Beyond Two Souls is about what happens after life or death. And yes, you could argue, well, you could throw a male character and it may just work. But I think, as I say, developers in some respect need to, take a sort of David Cage approach, because what is wrong with writing a game specifically for a female character? And that's what I'm trying to hit the point home. It seems at the moment these days that developers and publishers won't write a game with the gender of the character in mind, and 90% of the time it defaults straight to the male character because all gamers are male or whatever. And I don't think it should be that.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's the wrong way to approach it. I really do, because, as I say, even if there's controversy around a female lead character, or some of the questions that are raised within the game, if it gets people talking about it and it crushes them social barriers, great. You're doing something positive for the industry as a whole. And even if it doesn't sell all those 16 million copies like a Call of Duty, for example, it's still achieved some of what the developer's aiming for.
Okay.
But as I say, the sad thing is that we're in a position where I can count how many female lead characters have been in games, certainly in this generation, on two hands, and that's bizarre when you think about how many games are put out every year.
I'd like to
3,000 games, and yet over 6 years I can only think of 10 female lead characters.
Yeah, there's not too many. Or the other thing is like you see like Lollipop Chainsaw, where it's clearly the gist of having the female in there is that whole sexy thing for a man.
Yeah.
It's like they're doing that to give some eye candy, as it were. And
I think
that's almost like you would think that would be insulting to women, where they'd be like, oh, okay, yeah.
Yes, but at the same time, I think people kind of miss the point with games like Bayonetta and Lollipop Chainsaw. They were deliberately done that way. Obviously, you've got the game, and there's a developer. You know how some developers are like practical jokers, or have their message hidden behind everything else. So you play a game, you get the entertainment value, you get the story, you get the character building and stuff, but you never really question the developer's motives half the time. When you're playing a game, and something like Lollipop Chainsaw and Bayonetta, the reason it's over-sexual is because it's kind of saying, it's like giving people a middle finger and saying, well, we've made it over-sexual. Now you might actually start thinking about making normal games that aren't over-sexualized with female characters in. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like a weird way of them putting it across.
Yeah.
As a kind of tongue-in-cheek method of doing it.
Well, I'm going to be interested to hear from some of our female gamers as to if they think that playing a male so often, if that pulls them from their experience. Like if they're playing Call of Duty and then all of a sudden like a male voice rings out from their character, if that kind of snaps them out of the moment. I'd be interested to hear that and get a perspective, because from the male perspective, I could see playing Lara Croft and it would almost be like I would just forget that that's a female until certain things probably occurred, and then that would take me out of it. Like kissing a guy, for example, would be the perfect example. Like you're kind of going along, you're kind of forgetting that it's a female, or you're into the idea that you're kind of watching this like a movie, and that might kind of, I don't know, snap you out of it. The reason I say that is I played the female character in Mass Effect. And I was very keen to the whole, having a female girlfriend element.
Yeah.
But let's say I wasn't, if I was playing a male shepherd and then all of a sudden, like, I didn't have a choice and he just kissed a male shepherd, or kissed a male character. My male shepherd kissed a male character. That would certainly take me aback. That would kind of like, So I wonder how much of that is, like, are female gamers, do you think, used to They're just like, well, we always play a guy, so it's like, I'm used to that. I'm playing a guy in my Call of Duty. I'm playing a guy in my, my Far Cry. I'm doing.
Well, I've got to admit, although I'm sort of making this mature discussion as such, I mean, I sadly did something immature, which is obviously, Dragon Age. In the first one, you could make obviously your male character homosexual, and I've got to be honest, I did it out of curiosity because I really wanted to see how EA addressed it. And, in the end, I just found it kind of funny. Probably shouldn't have, really, because it's obviously a serious thing to some degree. But, I couldn't help, exploring it just out of curiosity to see what all the fuss was about, around EA. It found it a little bit funny. But the truth be told, when you sort of sit down and think about it afterwards, you think, well, give yourself a pat on the back for if you're EA, because you actually did it in quite a tactful way. I think it's just because I'm so not used to seeing it in games that it just sort of, it was bizarre and made me laugh. But, there's a very serious issue there with it.
Yeah. Well, and it could be used to go the other way too and make fun of, and that could certainly be bad, especially in a multiplayer environment where you had something like that. And I don't know that there's anyone that's really touched upon that in a multiplayer environment, because most multiplayer just kind of dilutes into shoot somebody and nondescript people. Even when you have a main character in the game, typically you don't see them in any kind of multiplayer context. But I don't know. This is one of those topics that's probably bound to be an issue long into the future. There's probably lots of things that have to happen to find a solution. But I certainly would like to hear from some females this time around and see, if this takes them out of that, the gaming context that they're in, the mindset that they're in when they run across this.
Definitely.
So.
I think from my perspective, from a male's perspective, I just, as I said, I'd love to see developers take up the challenge and put more games out there with female leads, and to, I guess, to kind of not only help push the issue to the front of people's thoughts, but also in some respect be able to gather more accurate research. I think because essentially it must be hard for people researching this kind of thing and the effects it has, because there are so few games out there that have female lead characters that you can't really. I'm imagining it would be very difficult to do some research on it, because I mean, what sort of content can you put out to your survey, if you so to speak?
What would be interesting? What would be really interesting?
Go on.
If Sony was to come out with a someone for their advertising that was a female gamer, a female character.
Yeah, I think that would be kind of cool as well.
That would be really neat. That would be kind of speaking to the next, kind of an evolution of gaming.
Yeah. Because and even with it's funny you mention that, and actually it's a good point to bring up, because even in game advertisements, it's still very stereotypical. You get the women in the advert laughing, watching away, and the focus is on the man playing the game and looking all butch, and I just think, why can't you stick a woman?
So we need a female watching, Kevin Butler.
Yeah, a female Kevin Butler would be nice.
I remember seeing a video on YouTube. It was this male's talking smack to a female video gaming character that's soon joined by like 6 or 7 other female gamers, and they just start humiliating him and all the stuff.
Yeah, it was a comedy video, that one. It was deliberately done.
Yes. It was deliberate. It was a kind of a parody video, but very well done. I remember seeing that. It was hilarious.
and it was a good way of kind of emphasising some of the points that we're even covering today. You know,
We should find that and link that to the article about this.
yeah, be cool. But yeah, no, I think you're right in terms of advertising as well. As you say, I certainly would like to see more advertisements where, again, the woman is at the forefront of the advert and not in a sort of over-sexual way, i.e. I'm going to stand next to a PlayStation 3 in a bikini because I'm a hot, stunning model kind of advertisements, but, showing women enjoying playing video games, because the truth of it is women do enjoy playing video games.
Mm-hmm.
So why not show that in your advertisements and stuff instead of having them in the background, or attaching them to stereotypical games like a SingStar or a party game or whatever. I know plenty of women gamers that are quite happy to sit down with a Call of Duty and smash people's skulls in with the butt of their rifle, or play Gears of War. So advertisers show women doing this, because then, in some respect, I think female gamers won't be in the minority anymore. I think it would do wonders to attract more women to the industry, and actually get people female wanting to get involved with gaming for the right reasons.
Cool. Okay.
Damn it, if only we had like mega popularity, it would have been interesting to had a guest on of the caliber of Jade Raymond from Ubisoft, because she's sort of said about these kind of issues before herself. And for those that don't know, Jade Raymond is she was essentially the creative team leader behind Assassin's Creed, and is currently working on the next Assassin's Creed after Black Flag. So she does have an impact in the industry. But she said this before: why can't we explore? Why can't we have women issues in games and stuff? And she says the same thing. Developers just these days aren't brave enough.
It's funny you mention that. If you actually are a student of history and in things like the martial arts, you learn about the ancient system of assassination. Actually, back in the day, the way they would assassinate rulers is typically their concubine, their female slaves or whatever were actually the ones that were chosen to assassinate them, because they were kind of on the inside, as it were. So you go back in the day, and actually it was more popular to have female assassins killing off rulers than it was to have a male assassin. So just a little historical footnote there.
It's interesting you mentioned female assassins, because I tell you what, the Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation game on PlayStation Vita actually had a female assassin for the first time as a character, and it was a great game.
There you go.
Great addition to the franchise. We're used to seeing the typical male hero, the bro.
The bro. Okay, well, I think we're going to call it a day here. Thank you for joining us, and we'll look forward to some polls here about this. We get some of our females to kind of chip in their ideas on this, because I really want to hear. Is this something that we as males don't have a clear perspective on? It's possible,
Or are we just overthinking it?
Are we overthinking it? Do you think we're going to get that response? Females are going to be like, who cares? We play guys all the time, You're making a bigger deal out of it than...
I don't know. I've got to be honest. I think we'll probably get a fairly wide spectrum of different perspectives on it. There will obviously be the ones that, like, I don't care, I'll kill blokes all day long as long as I got ammo in my gun. And then you'll get people like, actually, we kind of would like more games like Lara Croft, where we can do interesting stuff with female characters that actually appeal to both genders and stuff. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what crops up in the comments as well. I'd certainly also want to see more male perspectives on this. I mean, as a bloke, do you think we're overthinking this, or do you even consider it an issue or a non-issue?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, in some respects, I'd say a majority of blokes in the, gamers wise, probably don't even really think that far in terms of that.
Yeah.
And I know that's a sweeping statement, but you know, I welcome anybody to make a compelling case against that sweeping statement.
Yeah. And how does it stand up against some of the other issues?
Mm.
That's another thing too. I wonder if they should highlight when they deal with female gamers, should they highlight also highlight the homosexuality elements and stuff like that at the same time, or is that too much? I would tend to think that we just need to get more female gamers in as a whole, female characters. Um,
I think
before you
I
start
think
before you start going down these other roads, if you just make a game and it's controversial for this reason, this reason, this reason, it takes away from all reasons, and
I
it becomes
just
very apparent that it's
you
done
know
just to cause controversy.
I'm glad you mentioned that actually because it just occurred to me that you're right in terms of we need to appeal to more female gamers, and I just wonder if more female protagonists. I mean, we all have our sort of gaming heroes, the sort of heroes that we really get behind when we play in games like Nathan Drake, and for some people, the next generation of games developers, they'll have specific characters or specific heroes that will inspire them to go create a game. And so I hope that if we have more female protagonists, that will inspire female gamers to get involved in the development side as well, not just as gamers playing an interesting female character as a lead role, but also to actually go and make more games that are, you know, female orientated, or at least on a gender scale, equal.
Yeah. Hmm.
That would be cool if that really could happen.
Okie dokie. Anything else?
Uh, Not really. I can't. To be honest with you, I got to admit my brain isn't as sharp today as it usually is.
Too much candy?
No.
Too many
Too much coffee.
chocolate eggs?
Too much coffee. You know me.
All right. Yeah, I gotta go catch me an Easter bunny.
Yeah.
Got the family thing. Easter time. Busy time of the year.
Elmer Fuddhap.
Hunting rabbits. Be wary quiet. I'm hunting rabbits.
Yeah, I can just imagine you doing that, actually.
Yeah, rabbits are very good to eat.
Yeah, well, seeing as comes to America, it's not particularly difficult, is it? Couldn't go rabbit hunting there. You'd have to make a trap with sticks or something. You couldn't shoot one.
Okay.
That's a topic for another day, though.
All right. So next week, rabbit hunting.
Yes.
Alrighty, folks. Thank you for joining the PodStation by Trophies on PSN. I'm Kryptonite Dragon.
And I'm Dante Zero.
Have a happy Easter. Have a great day. Farewell.